What happens if this changes everything? What if this moment becomes the beginning of something much bigger? A seismic shift that tears down the walls of the current status quo. Guys, I don't think we are paying attention to what comes next. We hear whispers, we see shadows of the past looming, but the true impact of a legendary return is rarely just a happy reunion. If the rumors of Greg Vaughn stepping back into the shoes of Lucky Spencer actually materialize, we are not just looking at a nostalgic homecoming. We are looking at a localized hurricane hitting the very heart of Port Charles. This could lead to a romantic war unlike anything we have seen in years, fundamentally altering the trajectories of several legacy characters and igniting conflicts that have been buried for over a decade. Right now, if you look at the board, the pieces are delicately balanced around one central queen, Elizabeth Weber. She is standing at a crossroads, fiercely independent, guarding her heart with everything she has. She is not rushing into anyone's arms. But look at the knights circling her. On one side, we have Rick Lansing, a man whose history with Elizabeth is as complex and dark as it is passionate. He is back, he is paying attention, and he never does anything without a calculated reason. On the other side, we have Dante Falconeri. Dante and Elizabeth have been growing closer, sharing vulnerabilities, building a foundation of trust that feels incredibly grounding. Dante represents stability, while Rick represents a dangerous allure. Elizabeth is holding both of them at a distance, weighing her options, perfectly content to remain unattached until she is absolutely sure. The board is set perfectly for a massive disruption. Let us project into the first potential future. The story could be heading toward a high-stakes, emotionally volatile quadrangle the second Lucky Spencer's boots hit the Port Charles pavement. In this scenario, Greg Vaughn's Lucky does not return as the wandering soul looking to quietly slip back into his family's orbit. He returns as a man on a mission, mature, decisive, and fully determined to reclaim the love of his life. If that happens, the immediate consequence is an all-out territorial war. Lucky steps in, expecting his profound historical connection with Elizabeth to trump everything else. But who benefits here? The audience, absolutely, but strategically, Rick Lansing might actually thrive in this chaos. Rick loves a psychological battle. He would use Lucky's long absence as a weapon, constantly reminding Elizabeth that while Lucky was out finding himself, she was left alone to raise her family and fight her battles. Who is in danger in this first future? Dante Falconeri. Dante's slow, steady progress with Elizabeth could be completely derailed by the sheer gravitational pull of Lucky's history. The bigger consequence may be that Elizabeth is forced to choose between the ghost of her greatest love, the dangerous temptation of Rick, and the solid reality of Dante. Lucky would demand to know who was truly there for her, turning every casual conversation into a high-stakes interrogation. The psychological warfare in this first path would be staggering. Imagine the scenes at General Hospital. Lucky corners Rick by the nurse's station, their history of mutual disdain flaring up instantly. Lucky sees Rick as the man who manipulated Elizabeth in her darkest times, while Rick sees Lucky as the boy who could never quite step up and be the man Elizabeth actually needed. And then there is Dante, the righteous cop, stepping between them, representing the law and order that both Rick and Lucky have famously flouted in their own ways. Dante would not back down. He would look Lucky squarely in the eye and remind him that presence matters more than legacy. If this path unfolds, Elizabeth becomes the ultimate prize in a contest of male ego, which might actually push her to do something drastic. The sheer intensity of three powerful men fighting for her attention could create a toxic environment, forcing everyone involved to confront their deepest insecurities. This could lead to a scenario where the men are so busy fighting each other that they completely lose sight of what Elizabeth actually needs in her life right now. But let us pivot to a second, entirely different future. What if Lucky's return does not spark a war over Elizabeth, but instead ignites a profound internal rebellion within her? In this future, the arrival of Greg Vaughn's Lucky does not make Elizabeth swoon. It makes her angry. She looks at Lucky, Rick, and Dante, and she shuts them all out. This path changes the entire dynamic. Instead of the men fighting each other, they are forced to form uneasy alliances, or wage a subtle, covert war to prove their individual worth to a woman who has entirely reclaimed her power. Looking ahead, this scenario strips away the nostalgia. Lucky realizes that the Elizabeth he left behind no longer exists. She is a powerhouse, a leader at the hospital, a mother who has survived unimaginable heartbreak without him. If that happens, the dynamics shift radically. Rick, realizing that manipulation will no longer work on this evolved version of Elizabeth, might actually have to show genuine, unselfish vulnerability, something he is terrified of doing. Dante, respecting her boundaries, might step back slightly, proving his love by giving her the space. Lucky and Rick refuse to give. There is a chance that this future turns into a masterclass of character growth. Lucky would have to court her from scratch, learning who this new Elizabeth is. He cannot rely on their teenage memories or their past marriages. He has to fall in love with the woman standing in front of him today. This completely alters the trajectory of all four characters. It removes the toxicity of a love triangle and replaces it with a compelling journey of self-worth and redefined boundaries. Elizabeth holding all the cards changes the power structure of Port Charles. In this second future, the men are on trial. Lucky has to answer for his absence, proving that his wanderlust has finally burned out. Rick has to prove that his darker impulses are truly a thing of the past and that he can offer a healthy, supportive partnership. Dante has to prove that his connection with Elizabeth is not just a convenient rebound from his past heartbreaks, but a genuine, enduring love. The story could be heading toward a deeply emotional exploration of what it means to earn someone's trust after it has been broken, making this potential storyline one of the most sophisticated narratives the show has delivered in years. Now, let us explore the third future, the absolute wild card that very few people are anticipating. What happens next may be something far more twisted. What if Lucky realizes that Elizabeth is too heavily guarded, and instead of fighting Rick and Dante head-on, he decides to use someone else to trigger Elizabeth's suppressed feelings? Imagine Lucky returning and immediately sparking a connection with someone unexpected, maybe even someone connected to Rick or Dante, or a completely new arrival in town. He plays the long game, using jealousy as his primary weapon. In this wildly unexpected scenario, Lucky's calculated distance drives Rick and Dante insane because they cannot figure out his angle. Elizabeth, who claimed she wanted to be left alone, suddenly finds herself consumed by the sight of Lucky moving on with someone else. This could lead to Elizabeth actually being the one to initiate the conflict. She might lean into Rick's darker tendencies to make Lucky jealous in return, or she might use Dante's steady affection as a shield. This path turns the romantic drama into a psychological thriller. It is dark, it is messy, and it is exactly the kind of soapy drama that keeps us glued to the screen. It destroys the image of the perfect, noble, Lucky Spencer and replaces it with a man who is willing to play dirty to get what he wants. This wildcard future would completely upend our expectations, turning the classic love story into a dangerous game of emotional chess where the casualties could be devastating. If you ask me, the path that feels most likely and honestly the most rewarding for longtime viewers is a combination of the first and second futures. I keep coming back to the idea that Greg Vaughn's Lucky is not a boy anymore. He is a man who has seen the world, and he would not return just to play games. The path that makes the most sense is the slow burn, where his sheer presence forces Rick and Dante to show their true colors. Rick will inevitably overplay his hand, trying to sabotage Lucky, which will only push Elizabeth away. Dante will remain the steady rock, but he might realize that he cannot compete with the decades of history and soulmate-level connection that Lucky and Elizabeth share. I truly believe that Elizabeth will initially reject Lucky, punishing him for his absence, but the undeniable gravity of their history will eventually pull them back together. However, she will make him work for it like never before. She will demand that he proves he is here to stay. My personal perspective is that Elizabeth has suffered enough at the hands of men who leave or men who manipulate. She needs a man who will stand by her unconditionally. If Lucky can prove he is that man, he wins. But if he falters even for a second, Rick or Dante will be there to pick up the pieces, and Elizabeth might just decide she is better off walking her path entirely alone, finding complete fulfillment in her career and her children. But let us look beyond the immediate resolution. If that scenario happens and Elizabeth ultimately makes a choice, what comes after that? The next shockwave is where the real long-term fallout lies. A rejected Rick Lansing is a dangerous Rick Lansing. If he loses Elizabeth to Lucky or Dante, Rick will not just walk away quietly. The bigger consequence may be Rick turning his manipulative sights on destroying his rival's life in other ways, perhaps going after their family, their career, or uncovering secrets from Lucky's time away from Port Charles. Rick could align himself with dangerous elements in town just to spite the man who took Elizabeth from him. And what about Dante? A heartbroken Dante might throw himself entirely into his police work, potentially uncovering whatever dark truths Lucky might have brought back with him from his travels. The future consequences of Elizabeth's choice will ripple out, creating new enemies, forging dangerous alliances, and ensuring that the peace in Port Charles is permanently shattered. The story will continue to expand, proving that in this town, love is never just about two people. It is about the collateral damage they leave behind. If Lucky's return is the match, Elizabeth's final decision is the powder keg. What happens next could burn down the lives of everyone involved, setting the stage for years of revenge, regret, and relentless drama.
Goodbye. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the GH Spoilers Daily channel.